what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Monday Overreaction Show. It's Monday. I'm Jeff. That's Anwar. This video brought to you by RogueShop.com. Check out that little emblem above our heads. Use that promo code Orangebloods, and you can get the Orangebloods. I think it's like a 20% discount for Texas's home for legal CBD, THC, and more. I'm anticipating that at some point Richard will jump into the chat. We'll talk with him and say hello and see if there's anything else we need to pitch on this wonderful Monday where the weather's not quite as bad. I don't know. I glanced outside there for a second onward just to make sure. A lot of stuff to get into today. I've got some think piece type stuff to get into, but there's actually football news of the day, Anwar, that we can lead off with as we tell everybody to like the video, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, ring that bell, do all of those things. Let's start off with the news of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting, Catch. News of the day is, you and I have talked about coaching stability, and it feels like ever since I've been here, Catch, there's been no such thing as coaching stability, whether it's assistants or head coaches. And, we come to find out through a board of regents that 7 assistant coaches receive extensions. Kyle Flood gets a 2-year extension, Catch, while everybody else gets a 1-year extension. The other guys who didn't get extensions, quote unquote, would be Chris Jackson, who just got here, Jeff Banks, and Bo Davis, who received extensions last year. But this pretty much does a good job of keeping the entire staff pretty much intact for the next, this season and the following one. Then followed by, like I said, Flood seems to be the guy. If Sarkisian has a love for someone, Flood ends up being a guy that stays until 2025. So that's kind of the newsy-ish thing that's kind of come out today.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. It's not surprising that those guys would be getting extensions to stay on staff at this point. We weren't expecting any of those guys to drop off. Interesting that there's still no Gary Patterson. I think maybe we're making too much out of it, but I think he had a 1-year deal as well. I think I think his contract expires at some point this year, and so his name not mentioned among those names. It's also interesting that there's no Longhorns or Texas stuff on his Twitter page right now, which I feel like that has changed, but all in all, the guys that I think Texas, look, Steve Sarkisian has the next couple of years. So it stands to reason that the assistants he wants to keep will still be here with him. Some of the dollars involved, I think is really interesting simply because Texas has as many or more millionaire assistant coaches on its coaching staff than I think any school in the country. And Kyle Flood's not making less money with this new extension. So, it will be a very well taken care of coaching staff going into this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's no shortage of money. What was interesting, Catch, is that there's a lot of guys actually did not get a raise. The guys who got a raise were AJ Milwee, goes from 375 to 425. Jeff Choate gets a raise right this season, Catch. This season, Jeff Choate, he goes from 575 to 625. And I mean, he's the only guy that gets a raise this year. But outside of that, the guys who signed 1-year extensions, Pete Kwiatkowski, Torrey Becton, Terry Joseph, Blake Gideon, Tashard Choice, those guys kind of remain the same. And so it's very interesting that I'd be curious at how those conversations went, where, you're saying like, hey, I'm doing a great job. We want to keep you around. Same pay, but we still want to keep you around. But, I think
those guys are already paid on the high end of the college scene.
Fair enough.
So it may be they go back to some of these guys and say, you're already in the top 5 of coaches at your position, top 10 of your coaches. And they have a lot of guys making more than $500,000, which would make the entire staff on the high side of what's going on in college football. Probably not a surprise that AJ Milwee, one of the lowest paid guys on the staff, is one of the guys that gets a bump Interesting. What would you say Choate was again?
So Choate goes from 575 to 625 this year. He gets a pay increase this year. And then his extension goes up to 675 in 2024.
Again, that is on the high side of guys who are not coordinators in college football. Banks makes $1 million. Flood makes more than $1 million. What's Flood's salary going to be this year?
The Flood catch, he goes from he was already in the books to make 1.25 this year, so there's no change for him. 2024 though, he goes up to 1.325. 2025 catch, that's the big one. He's at 1.4 million at 2025.
Yeah, man, like that's like I said, they've got guys because he does have the tag co-offensive coordinator, right? But
yeah,
he's not calling the plays. Nobody really. They do that for salary purposes to justify, in part, being able to pay that much money. But in reality, he's the offensive line coach, and that's Texas paying its offensive line coach money that will keep him at Texas as opposed to being potentially poached elsewhere. If you want to come get a Texas assistant coach, you better be ready to open up the checkbook. But all in all, nothing earth-shattering in there. I think this is what it looks like when you've got a head coach who's on good ground with the board of regents, the athletic director, the school president, all of the various ladders of the university. And they still believe in him. They still believe in his recruiting. And it's not a coach that's really on any kind of a hot seat right now. They want to continue making sure that their investment into the program is strong. And so this is what that looks like. You know, what does this look like in a year from now or 2 years from now is really the big question. It kind of feels like all quiet on the Western Front right now, just kind of status quo. Next season will be a big season when these things come back around and you start talking about the next set of contracts. I think, there will either be raises for everybody or there will be serious questions asked about who's on this staff and why they're still here if this team's not really winning at a high level.
So my question to you, Catch, and before we move on from that is, at what point do you think Sark says, okay, it's time to talk about me? And then at what point does that happen? And do you think that Texas would be any sorts of gun shy on giving out an extension, and even if it's a year, kind of based on kind of past experiences where they've kind of been like, we did these extensions. We saw that I think the former basketball coach, didn't he get one, if I'm correct? I know Herman did after the Sugar Bowl. I'm just kind of curious what are your thoughts on as relates to that's the assistants. What about Sark?
I think that he's got 4 years left on his deal. He's in the middle of or the beginning of his third year, but there are still 4 football seasons left on his contract. So I think from the Texas side of things, there's enough there on that deal that you don't feel like you need to go to the table right now to discuss an extension. They have to be very careful not to repeat what occurred under Tom Herman, which is giving an extension so early that it becomes burdensome. Should they have questions in a year or two? I think this season's if he has a big 2023, I think that you'll start to see that extension talk pretty quickly. If they don't make the Big 12 championship game, I think then if you're the University of Texas, he still has 3 years left on his deal. I don't think it becomes a real issue in recruiting or anything like that until you get down to 2 years. So there's just no pressure right now. It would be a mistake for Texas to be talking extension with Steve Sarkisian. Now, they've got him on a pretty cheap contract right now by comparison to his peers across the country. If they wanted to give him a raise but not an extension, I could see that as a show of good faith that we want to keep you because he's making less than $6 million a year, which there's 8, 9, 10 coaches who are making $9 million a year.
Yeah.
At some point, he's going to want to be on the high end of that. When they come to an agreement on that remains to be seen. I would give him a raise, though, before I would start talking extension. I wouldn't want to give him a raise if I was the AD, but it's such a AD-friendly contract that I think you could give him an extra $2 million a year, and you're still on the rather inexpensive side of head coaching salaries in college football, which can only continue to go up. In 2 years from now, there will be 10 guys who are making $10 million a year. And certainly when Sarkisian signs an extension, if and when that happens, he's going to want to be paid in that kind of territory.
So here's my question then to you, Catch. When we look at these contracts, right, it looks like all of them go through basically the 2024 season, right? So that means they would all expire on February the 28th, 2025. So does that make 2024 kind of like the do or die kind of year? Because essentially all the assistant coaches, for the most part, their deals are going to be done after the 2024 season. And that's year one of the SEC, Ohio State's on it. Does that, when we starting like to think about, okay, what's the year where, okay, there's the pressure, quote unquote, on Sark. Does 2024, now that we know what the contracts are, what the extensions are, does 2024 kind of become that thing for you?
It doesn't have to be, but it could. And I think that it feels like an insurance card for the program that, this stuff gets completely answered with a big 2023.
Yeah.
Falling short in 2023 and then going into year one of the Big 12, at some point, if you're the athletic director and the decision makers at Texas, you have to prepare yourself for, we can't let this thing get out of control. So I see what you were saying. I think that's the worst case. I mean, the best case is that it just continues to roll over and, there would be no immediate in the short-term plans or future to make a head coaching change, which means that's what you want. They give themselves an out, though, that I think is synchronized pretty well should it ever come to that point. But I don't think you'd ever get anybody inside the university at this point, right? Because they're not there. So, but this is, I think, in a get out of jail should the train go off the tracks for any reason at all. This gives them an out, but I don't think they'll ever want it to come to that. So it's probably a maybe, just because I think deep down that's a scenario that they're at least prepared for, but I don't think they envision. I don't talk to people behind the university walls that have doubt in Sarkisian yet. So they're not, I think it's a good move by Del Conte and the Board of Regents to create that, but I wouldn't yell fire in a crowded room just yet.
Okay, so can I ask one more question? We can move on.
Sure.
Just as relates to that, and I've seen coaching staff continuity with other programs. I think like TCU used to have that thing for like the longest time where you just couldn't get guys to leave. And I think, what was it? Charlie made a run. It was at Sonny Cumbie, I think, at one point, and they were trying to get him in here, and that work. I'm hoping I'm not butchering his name. Overall, do you like knowing that these guys are going to be together for the next couple of years? Or I'm just kind of curious. Like, does that are you like overall when you look at the staff, you say, okay, that makes sense to keep these guys together? But before, you had questions on previous staffs. And guys, like, you would say to yourself, like, what's a Herb Hand kind of doing here? That kind of thing. Or you're like, you're like, check the boxes with me, move on.
Indifferent was kind of the word that was in my mind as you started to ask the question. Then as you started to pull some of the layers back on the question, it occurred to me that I'm indifferent towards it. But that doesn't mean that I don't have questions. just means that, because I do have questions about a number of guys on this staff. But I have no expectations that a change was going to be made, at least at this point. So really kind of out of sight, out of mind. These are Sark's guys. And thus far, he's not, I was going to say he's not failing. There will be some people who say 13-12 is a failure through 2 years. I don't really want to get into that conversation, but in the spirit of, again, the university believes in him. I think him giving them "these are my guys" speech still has weight, and it just kind of is what it is. So again, indifferent, because I don't know that I was expecting anything else, but don't confuse indifferent with a full endorsement of the makeup of this staff. He may have exactly the staff that he needs and wants. I still have some questions, and because they haven't won yet, I can't say that they've been answered.
Cool. All right. You want to move on to the fun topic?
Well, real quick, I don't have any good questions for you, but Is there a Anwar thought on all of this that, I don't want to leave like a tool in the tool bag and just ignore my perspective on this, if there's something that you wanted to add?
No. I would say, overall, I get first of all, keeping Kyle Flood, I think, matters, as far as what these offensive line recruiting is concerned. Like, I think for me, that's a must. That has to happen, right? So I'm okay with that. The Jeff Choate, extension is, hey, props to him for getting that from an overall kind of staff thing. I get it. It makes sense. I guess for me though, Catch, as we still sit here at 13-12, after 2 seasons and no bowl wins, I can't necessarily say I'm standing on the table for too many guys at this moment. That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'll stand on the table for Flood from a recruiting perspective and development, right? That's the guy that if you say, all right, gotta choose one, I'll stand on the table and bang the table for him.
If you had to save 2, who would be 2?
That's a fan.
And it's a problem that we don't have. I think it's a problem that it doesn't automatically jump out, right? Because that shows you that you've got a team that truly hasn't had a lot of success yet. When 1 is easy, 2, that's not to say they don't have a bunch of guys who aren't good. Mm-hmm. It's who's great. Who's your 2?
That's tough because, Tashard, I don't know. I'd have to see what he does past Bijan and Roshan as a coach. Choate, there's an argument to be made for him. There's definitely an argument to be made for Gideon. I'm just talking this thing out right now.
Kwiatkowski has to be up there, right? If you're Sark, you either believe he's a high-level defensive coordinator, which makes him the most important hire in an offense-driven program, because that's what Sarkisian is. He's an offensive guy. So it's always the opposite of who your head coach. That position becomes critically important. Either you think it's Kwiatkowski or he shouldn't be getting an extension and they should be looking for someone new.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, the Pete K gets, complex with the whole Gary Patterson, muddy of the waters kind of thing. And, again, I don't know if Sark stood on the table and wanted Gary here. I don't know if the previous relationship that Gary had with Delcani helps out with that one. You know what I'm saying?
Monday overreaction take?
Oh, gosh. Okay.
When I think of Kwiatkowski, I don't find myself giving Gary Patterson a lot of credit.
No, please do tell. I'd love to hear this.
I think Gary Patterson was great I think Gary Patterson makes a really good 1-year hire. And that kind of, I think back to in 2004, Mac Brown made 2 of his best hires in Greg Robinson and Dick Tomey. And those two guys came in and they were culture change guys. But then they both got head coaching jobs after year one. So, Tommy comes in, all that experience from Arizona. Greg Robinson comes in. He's won multiple Super Bowls as a defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos. They come in and they really changed a lot of what was wrong in the program. And then they were gone immediately. And then the next year, Texas wins a national championship in 2005. And those guys don't get rings. They don't get to take the stage. And yet every Texas fan from back then would say, those guys, you don't get to the 2005 national championship game without those guys in 2004. I think if you're Texas, you hope to get all of the Patterson stuff that he symbolizes and represents and brings to the table. I think you could get everything out of him that you could possibly need in a year, unless you think he's critical to the game day pieces of the puzzle on defense and he was the absolute key to the success of last season's defense. There were a few tweaks to the defense last year with regards to the general principles of which they played with, but I find myself giving most of the credit for what happened last year to Kwiatkowski, that he's the guy that is in charge of things on game days. He's, ultimately it's his defense and all of those coaches he's responsible for, not Gary Patterson, which means all of those position groups are controlled by guys he's in charge of. So I just find myself wanting to give whatever credit, not to say that Patterson was useless, but I don't know that Patterson, I think there's a part of me that thinks we may have talked too much about Gary Patterson.
Okay. All right.
And I love Gary. I just don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's really doing day in and day out, especially during the season, to know how to even talk about him.
I mean, he's an analyst. He's not calling plays during games, right? So, so all the play, you can do all the prep work that you want, but ultimately you can be a good trainer, but your boxer's got to be the one that goes out and wins the fight, right? It doesn't matter because the trainer's still going to be there on the sidelines. So, Pete came when it's all said and done, even if Gary helped him to prepare for Bama, Pete's got to call the plays, and this is a guy who ironically went from the booth down, and we've heard this before, how I only feel comfortable doing one thing. And he went from the booth down to the sidelines, did pretty good, did pretty fine, was able to adjust. I will just say this to Pete K's defense. I will say this. Okay, I'll just have to say it. I'll just have to clean it up later. We are now a year or two removed. I'm tap dancing.
I don't even
like
know
Sammy.
what you're gonna say. I'm on pins and needles.
I'm tap dancing like Sammy around this. Okay, I'll just F it. I'm just gonna say it. No one's hired Gary Patterson as a head coach or defensive coordinator since he's parted ways with TCU. And so that's not to say Gary's not a good coach. That's not to say he doesn't have value, but there are guys who find a way to get back into head coaching positions who are highly coveted, and guys who find a way to be DCs. Now, Gary may have enough money where he's not going to settle for less, and if that's the case, so be it. But to Pete's defense, I would just say if Gary was the earth, moon, and the stars, then I think we would have seen him resurface by now. That's all.
I think Gary Patterson loves playing golf every day. When
he was just playing over the weekend.
Here's what I think. I think for decades, you convince yourself that you're all about a certain kind of life. And then in a year, you can learn very quickly, this is so much better than what I was doing before.
Yes.
So look, when Matt Brown stepped away from Texas, he went a couple of years into doing studio work, which I thought he was really good at, by the way. And then he got the itch to come back. I look at Gary Patterson right now, and I think there may be a point where he says, I have the itch to get back. But the people that I talk to make it sound like Gary's really happy not even so much working at Texas, but living in Austin, that he's affluent now after all of the money that he's been able to stack up over the years. He can kind of do whatever it is that he wants to in his life every day. And at least half of those days, there needs to be a golf club in his hand.
Correct.
So, you know.
But he was interested in a Nebraska job, though. We do know that. Like, there was some interest there. So if Nebraska offers him and puts a good salary in front of him, he might have taken that one.
Gary hasn't done an interview where he's laid out what's important to him.
True.
So he hasn't said, I'm only going to come back if this, or hell, I'll come back in a bunch of different ways. I think last year really was, I want to stay in the game, because at that point he hadn't left the game at all. So it's like, I just got to keep working. That was his job, and it allowed him to live in Austin. I think with all due respect to like the street racing from the weekend and what's going on down on Congress or Lamar, wherever the hell that went down.
Lamar.
I think that he's enjoying himself. I think he likes it. So big city issues or not, that man likes playing the golf courses in this town.
you know, I think is going to have that revelation a couple of years from now. Herman.
Oh yeah.
I think Tom, this is overreaction. I think Tom's going to be at FAU, and after a year or two, just think to himself, you know what? This sucks, man. I don't even feel like doing this. Like, I was so much happier doing some stuff on television, and I told myself I'm a football coach, and this is what I need to do. And then it's like, nah. You know, there'll be a Tom Herman State Farm agency at some point in Austin.
He'll own a car dealership or something. I have no doubt. You may be right about that. You know, he's living in a great part of Florida too. Like, if you have to live in Florida, there are worse places to live than that. And I don't know. He's going to be. He's got an interest. There's no doubt when he's Gary Patterson's age. By then, Tom Herman, I think, will be enjoying the good life. And God bless him, man. I have no issues with Gary Patterson saying at 60, like, I'm good. I don't want to ever work again, and I don't have to. Cool, man. Go play golf.
If you're Gary, all you got to do is like, I guess I'll go drive and see my statue today and just roll in front and be like, yeah, I guess I am the man. You know,
that's the other thing, man. He could probably take a job at TCU that's kind of an ambassador job, where he goes and supports and hangs out on the sidelines and just supports the program and gets a nice little chunk of change that can cover like his golf course dues over the course of a year.
Like a VY kind of job.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. He's got like you said, he has a statue. Yeah. So there's probably $100,000 job a year that, again, just pays for some stuff that he can always have anytime he needs it. All right, I'm ready to get into this other stuff.
Let's do it.
Because I think it's really interesting. And again, if you haven't hit the thumbs up button, hit the thumbs up button while we're doing the Monday Overreaction Show. Don't forget, check out our guys over at rogueshop.com, forever the sponsor of this show. Promo code Orangebloods to get that Orangebloods discount for all of Texas's home for CBD, THC, and more. All of it legal, by the way. Just in case you were wondering. Legal. So Anwar, over the weekend, I was stumped for things to write about. And then I remembered something I'd done a couple of years ago where I think I had Keontae Ingram ranked as like the 5th best returning player on the Longhorns, and from 2 years ago. And a lot of people were like, what? It might have even been 3 years ago. So I was like, that'll be a good exercise. I'll do a ranking of the top 25 guys, especially because in one of our upcoming modcast videos, I want us to do our player auction draft again. I thought that was fun a year ago. And as we get ready to go into the spring, it feels like a good time to do that. So I did my top 25 Longhorns. And I think there were some interesting components into the list that are worthy of discussion. In part, I wasn't sure what to do with the quarterbacks, especially Quinn. I don't know how to rank Quinn Ewers right now. Do I just rank him on talent? At which point he's a top 5 guy for sure, maybe even top 3 if we're talking just flat out talent. Or if we're talking about a players list, how do I slot a guy who in his first season as a starter was a below average starter in terms of his final statistical ranking of 132, places him in the bottom third of quarterbacks that started in the Big 12. So I end up kind of ranking him in the teens. There's some discussion, I think, to be had about where we rank him, and we may jump back to that momentarily in a matter of minutes, maybe. The thing that kind of stuns me is that I ranked Kelvin Banks 1 and Xavier Worthy 2. And in one of the things that I talk about in this column, I went back, did a little bit of homework. I looked up the statistics for every single true junior wide receiver and fourth-year wide receiver. I looked up either guys who were in their third or fourth seasons at his position in college football. And Xavier Worthy, amongst all of his peers in major conferences across every conference in America, Xavier Worthy among his peers is first in receptions, first in receiving yards, first in receiving touchdowns. He is the Triple Crown winner among all juniors in college football. They're playing at major universities. Never have I seen that from a Texas wide receiver, ever. And yet, in putting together my top 25 list and putting Worthy at number 2, there is no question that the single biggest disconnect with Texas football fans and what comes back on this year's team is with Xavier Worthy. The only guy out of 25 that I ranked that anybody wanted to bitch about was Xavier Worthy. And to some Texas fans, he's just a quitter. And I look at the data, and the data says he's a supernova. Again, I can't stress this enough. Onward, I'm not talking to you right this second. For the next 10 seconds, I just want to talk to the audience. Amongst all players in his age group right now, he's first in every major statistical category. I don't know that there's a skill position player, maybe have to be Ricky Williams. Ricky, after his junior year, going to his senior year, almost certainly would have been on top of all of his rushing statistics. But coming out of his sophomore year, he wasn't. This is unprecedented among Texas football players, what Xavier Worthy has done at the wide receiver position. And Anwar, I'm just telling you, there are a lot of Texas fans that dislike him so much that they've convinced themselves those numbers don't matter at all.
And what's fascinating about that conversation, Catch, is it has more to do with body language than anything else. Like just more to do with the body language than the drops or anything to that effect. And it's so what's interesting about the conversation, Catch, is that there's no acknowledgement that there may have been legit reasons for Xavier Worthy to be frustrated last season. Like legit reasons that he might be frustrated that, hey, he's running around, he's open, and the ball doesn't get to him for whatever reasons, right? You can debate certain things, but I can see it. You know, we are able to see it, and it's okay. You know, Quinn is young, he was learning, but you also got to understand that Xavier, for as much shit as people talked about Casey Thompson had a way of getting the ball to Xavier. Now, it's crazy. What ends up being crazy is that there end up being this weird Casey Thompson mixtape of throws that he was unable to make and missed, right? You remember that? I think it might have been Kieran that actually put that out, if I'm correct. Like, I got to go back. If I'm not Kieran, please let me know. I don't want to be disrespectful. But I feel like that thing came out. And look, I'm a Quinn guy. So let's just keep it a buck. I'm a Quinn guy. I'm going to stand on the hill for Quinn. I'll die on the hill for Quinn. Someone could have put up a mixtape for Quinn the same way and talk about all the throws that he missed.
I think you just inadvertently put a piece of the puzzle together that I've not seen someone put together. We often look at this situation through the prism of, in 2022, Quinn couldn't hook up with Xavier. But this is really a 2-year problem. Xavier Worthy, on 2 years on the bounce, has had seasons where he's constantly running wide open and balls just don't come close to him.
Yes.
And it wasn't just Quinn last year. As you so astutely pointed out, it started the year before with Casey. So Xavier does everything he can to recruit Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
He puts him as his avatar. He's involving himself during the recruiting stage. He's living with him. They're working out together. And then they get out on the field during the games. And it's that same stuff from the year before. And I don't think Texas fans have truly given Xavier Worthy enough grace with regards to over a 20-something game span of football that he's played. And he ranks number 1 in everything. Imagine what his numbers would look like if over the course of the last 2 years, he had a quarterback that could just hit him in stride. Just hit him in stride.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just if it was Caleb Williams, would it be as frustrating, for him? You know what I'm saying? And again, it's just, how do you say about the excuse? Sometimes seems like, I love that saying that you say, I just don't always remember it, but the explanation
sometimes
seems like
an excuse is just the reason why something happened.
Yeah. And so it sounds like an excuse, right? But it's really more of an explanation as to, because that's, like I'm gonna say, it's body language. And of course, sure, he's had some drops. Like, that's what happens with receivers. It's going to happen. And so, I'm sure Xavier would own that. But, he's one of those things, if you're going to have him own up to drops, then there's going to be other things that other people would have to own up to as well. Like, it just can't be all on one particular guy. There's no catch. If Xavier Worthy was average, if he was just a guy, Steve Sarkisian would have been like, dude, go. We've seen Sark let guys go. We've seen Sark not fight for guys or try to have them on the roster. Like, we've seen them shoulder shrug guys. We've seen them show guys the door. We've heard the stories of like, hey, man, it ain't really working out for you here. You should really consider going in the transfer portal. This ain't the spot for you. That ain't what he said. So there's a like, duh kind of thing where it's like, no, man, like, that guy's good. That guy's getting open. Like, you said it. Well, you said something I said that you like. The thing that you've said that I've always enjoyed is Xavier's done the hard thing, which is get open. Like that, he's done the hard thing, which is get. Oh, that's the hardest thing to do. Get separation, get open. He's able to do that. It's just about finishing at that point. But you're right. For some folks, he just needs another big game, and then people will. You know what'll happen, Catch? This I'm gonna guarantee.
Do you think it's a monster game away?
Here it is. It's a monster game away. And then when we bring up that people used to be shit on Xavier, then everyone will get on us and jump on us and make us the bad guys and forget all the crap that they said over the last year or two. 100% guaranteed.
So I wrote about Xavier in mid to late November. My direct message says November 23rd. So I think probably right after the 11th game of the season. This Texas staff member said slid into my DMs unprovoked, wanted to thank me for sticking up for Xavier. The staff member said, "Thank you for the facts. He has 7 actual drops this year. I heard that Jordan Addison at Pittsburgh had 13 last year, and he had a senior first-round quarterback who didn't miss him when he was wide open. This false narrative that people are putting out is crazy. Patriots said that he would be a first-round pick. X now runs the whole route tree with real speed." That's me. I'm reading from a direct message from a Texas staff member last year. His coaches don't blame him for this. I don't know how else to put it. They are not trying to run Xavier Worthy out of the program, as you were just saying. There's a lot of things they could have done. It's the opposite. That Texas fans don't want that. It's so funny, Anwar. I brought up that body language thing middle of last season. It was actually probably pretty early. And I remember when I brought it up, it felt taboo at first to talk about, right? Because we were the first ones to talk about it. And I was like, if he doesn't stop this, it's going to become a thing. It's become such a thing that it now overshadows the fact that he is statistically the best receiver this program has ever had through 2 football seasons. He will be gone one day, and Texas fans will want what he actually does to reproduce themselves. And it's easier said than done to find these guys who are like first in every category amongst their peers. There's a lot of good football players. For the record, his peers include Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
Emeka Egbuka, also at Ohio State, Ja'Cory Brooks at Alabama, Mario Williams at USC. Mario Williams, a 5-star guy who goes to Oklahoma, then goes to USC, has been a multi-year starter. Xavier Worthy has more than twice as many receiving touchdowns in his career, and he almost has twice as many career yards, and he does have twice as many receptions. Peer for peer. And it's fascinating because Texas fans that don't like him have started saying things like, well, those numbers don't matter because he gets such a high volume of passes. And it's like, well, all really badass wide receivers get a lot of passes thrown their way. He probably averaged between 10 and 12 a game. Yeah, that's about right. It's the type of routes that they featured him on last year, Anwar, that became really part of the problem. Some of this is on Sarkisian's. Now, look, he drops the three balls in the bowl game, and that's one of the lasting memories. He finished with 10 for the season, which when you consider that he's targeted it, I mean, I wish I could go to the drop ball percentage that I saw posted after the season. He was towards the bottom of the Big 12, like in a good way. His drop percentage wasn't as high as a lot of his peers in the Big 12. He had, among Big 12 receiving leaders, he was in the bottom 3 of actual drop passes. So the reality is really good receivers that have the ball thrown to them a lot, drop lots of balls in college football. Like that's what the numbers would say, at least if you looked at Big 12 teams. You know, the guy at Iowa State dropped a bunch of passes. Like it happens. It happens. Texas fans have taken the worst part of Xavier Worthy's game and they've let it wash away and like take ownership of what we should be thinking about with his career and his production. And in reality, nobody else in college football has an Xavier Worthy. I mean, there's not even a clear cut number 2. Marvin Harrison is right behind him with touchdown receptions, but he's 16th in yards and 5th in receptions. I mean, he's going to be a first-round draft pick, but he's not. He's the closest thing in college football to what Xavier Worthy is doing from a production standpoint. And every team in the country would cut their wrists to get Marvin Harrison on their team. He's incredible. And it just blows my mind that what this guy's actually done in 2 seasons is completely forgotten by a lot of people based on the body language. Not what I feel like Allen Iverson, not in the games, not his stats in the games, on his body language. It's something he's got to figure out a way to get back on top of going into this season.
And the other thing too, Catch, I saw something in the chat by someone, and they mentioned it was Dustin. It stood out to me because it was Dustin M. I was like, is that McComas? But he talked about, it was not too long, about a minute or so ago. Maybe him Xavier thinking about transferring, right? And that's come up more than one time, and the commitment to the program and wavering this and that. Can I say what's interesting about that? The comment by Dustin is that it's interesting how it's easy to be upset at someone for thinking about transferring, but yet then again, think of all the people that are on this team who have transferred from other programs that you embrace. Like Quinn Ewers has transferred from another program.
A.D. Mitchell
is transferred from another program. Isaiah Nayor has transferred from another program. Ryan Watts comes in from another program. Jalen Catalon comes in from another program. So it's interesting how we're going to apply this person considered transferring, and how we weigh that against the people who actually went ahead and did it, who actually did leave a program. You know what I'm saying? So yes, he may have thought about it. There's tons of guys that think about it. He's not the only guy that at the end of the season thinks about transferring. Because of his spotlight, he ends up being the guy that we talk about more. There's Catch and I can't tell you how many guys that we don't always put out there on Front Street that we hear about, thinking about leaving. Up until the midnight hour of the transfer portal closing. Correct? I mean, all these guys are doing it. Just one guy is catching slack for it, or flack for it, however the word is, getting shit for it. That's the easier word for me to say. And it's interesting because, like I said, it doesn't seem to apply to everyone else.
A.D. Mitchell's a hero, right? I mean, he will be celebrated because he made the decision to leave defending champion Georgia to come to Texas. But that same little piece of distinction that is celebrated when you get a guy is treated as the cardinal sin of all cardinal sins. And he hasn't done it. He just thought about doing it. Like,
correct.
That's like getting in trouble if you're a married guy because you thought about like cheating on your wife. You never did anything, never messed around, never got another girl's phone number, never went on a date, let alone you never did anything. But
you like the picture. You like the picture on Instagram. She wants a divorce.
And it's like you said something in your dreams or something one night, right? Like it just came out and you don't even know what you did. It's like getting in trouble for not actually doing something, and then all of the good stuff that you've done be completely wiped away by the thing that you didn't actually do. And look, I'm not going to hit stray bullets on any player in the Texas program today over this. Like, I'm not going to have some guy at 1:00 getting text messages from his boys who are like, yo, Xavier Worthy was not the most difficult return from this season for the Longhorns. There is at least one other guy that I can think of that came much closer to an exit than Xavier Worthy did. And he almost became an exit last year too. But he doesn't have the profile of Xavier Worthy, so nobody really cares. So there's a lot of hypocrisy involved in judging Xavier Worthy because he thought about leaving. I mean,
when you verbalize it like this, said thought about it.
Yeah. The other thing is, it's not like Xavier himself behind the scenes has gone onto social media and played games. Not really. He's taken Texas and stuff off of his stuff, but he's never once during the season when they asked him about whether he was going to transfer or not. He never once said something that I can think of that was really problematic. He was asked, and he kind of evaded those questions and talked about his team. Even when he did return this year, he's the only guy on the team that returned that didn't have a big social media message saying, I'm returning. He just showed up at classes. So I wouldn't say he's done nothing. Maybe that's too strong on social media. He's done some things on social media that at least make people ask questions. But I would argue that other than us acting like crazy people and trying to decipher what certain things mean on social media, he hasn't actually articulated a thought into words that other people can see or hear that I think would be the kind of thing that would be thought of as stoking the fire. So I just don't completely get it. But Anwar, it speaks to how powerful the visuals are, because some of this stuff can't be visualized. The pouting after a play or the body language or however you want to say it, that created a picture. And maybe it's just as simple as a picture's worth a million words kind of a thing.
But you know what's so interesting about that? And maybe because they saw it multiple times. And again, you and I live in this world, Catch, like you said, when we do a show like this, and then it only takes about an hour or so before, you know, somebody is DMing us. So you're like, sometimes like, well, I don't really want that smoke today. But can I just say this? I'm not trying to just be disrespectful to the young man, this and that. But we saw an incident this past year with another receiver who was on the team that got really heated, and it got really, really bad, where people are like, is he throwing them gang signs? Like, what the hell is going on over here? And, you know, and it got bad. And everyone's kind of shrugged that off. And a guy looks unhappy after getting open and and the ball sailing, 15 yards over his head. And it's like, that guy there, now that's the problem. It's like, it's to me, it's a little bit displaced anger. And it also shows to me, Catch, it's almost like a mob mentality. When the mob starts to turn on you, then the mob turns on you. And that just kind of becomes what it is.
Here's an example of kind of what I'm talking about here. My man here is like, Catch, that's my problem, Anwar, is that I'm using career numbers. I'm using a larger sample size, and in my larger sample size, he's number one. My problem is I need to look at through a very narrow lens at just half of the data, so that I can then come up with an equation that says he still led the Big 12 in touchdown receptions. He still finished second team all Big 12 and led the Longhorns in every category. Like, what are you trying to say? What is it that you think? Just look at 2022 and get back with us. I just got back with you. He led the Big 12 in touchdowns. I'm not saying that's everything, but I'm saying it's kind of something. I mean, what more do you want your wide receivers to do than get into the end zone? It's the one thing I point out with Jordan Whittington and say he's got to do a lot better. Jordan Whittington only scored one touchdown a year ago. Like, that is not good enough. And we can say, well, they're not throwing the ball enough. I hear you. You can say that they need to do different things with him. I hear you. What he's not doing, though, is creating big plays and touchdowns. Xavier Worthy created big plays and touchdowns at a higher level than anybody in the Big 12 at his position group. And that includes a couple of guys that are going to go really high in the draft. He got in the end zone more than Quentin Johnston did. I mean, that guy's going to be a first-round draft pick. You got to start appreciating what you have in Xavier Worthy. At his worst, which is, I think, what last season was, at his worst, he was still a guy that would start on every college football team in America. In fact, If Xavier Worthy played for Alabama, they don't miss the playoffs. Because part of Alabama's problem all year long, and we saw it in the Texas game, they didn't have an alpha wide receiver. They had these transfers come in from Louisville and from Georgia, and those guys were, they were just okay. If Xavier Worthy's playing with a first-round level quarterback, like last year's reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Alabama is in the playoff this year instead of sitting out. Xavier Worthy starts for everybody. And even if you don't like Xavier Worthy, how many guys on this Texas football team, Anwar, can we honestly say they can start for every team in the country?
Ooh.
Right now.
I mean, you want to go down the list or?
Yeah, I'm saying Banks.
Okay, Worthy. Yeah, so Banks, Worthy.
I think there's probably 2 or 3 teams that would take their potential first-round draft pick next year. The confirmation. There's a left tackle at Notre Dame that's supposed to be really good. It's going to be a first-round draft pick next year. They may think that guy's better than Banks and Banks vice versa. Just in the spirit of the conversation.
Sure.
120 plus teams.
I would still move if I had someone I thought was better than Banks. I'd still move in the right tackle for a year and then move him back. I mean, he's still starting. Okay,
Jalen Ford makes the list, right?
On the offense, Jatavian would be the other guy. I would probably say Ford absolutely makes the list,
and I would say A.D. Mitchell simply because he did start for Georgia.
Okay,
but and Texas seems to think he's going to walk in and start for them. So I think you've got 6 guys, or 5 guys: Mitchell, Sanders, Ford, Worthy, Banks. That's actually a credit to the Texas program. In recent years, we'd say 1 or none or 2, right? Yeah. You'd say this time a year ago, you would have said Bijan and nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
After this year, you're up to 5.
Yeah.
Obviously, they want that number to grow. You'd like to have 15 guys that you look at and go, they can start for anybody. Texas doesn't have that yet, but Worthy's one of your 5 guys. You need more Worthys. This program needs more Xavier Worthys.
Yeah.
If this team had 15 Xavier Worthys on it, it wins the Big 12 last year. Maybe wins a national championship if one of those Xavier Worthys is at quarterback. Just saying.
Fair point.
What is your top? Let me ask you this. If we're talking top 5 pro players in the program, so I did my ranking, and I went Banks 1, Worthy 2, Jalen Ford 3, Jatavion Sanders 4, A.D. Mitchell 5. The next 5 guys in order were Jahdae Barron, Christian Jones, Barron Sorrell, Tavondre Sweat, Jordan Whittington. Did I do anybody wrong out of that group? Did anything feel out of place?
So the one that was a little bit for me, and I probably go with the masses that commented on that catch. I feel like you got to put Quinn in your top 10.
Okay, so let's have the Quinn conversation.
I don't know if I can have a guy who's starting as opposed to like an A.D. Mitchell, who hasn't really played a ton.
He played a national champion. He scored a touchdown in 4 different playoff games. Sure. No other player's ever done that in college football history.
Yeah. If you're asking me a guy that I would consider moving out, I would consider bumping him out a little bit. Tavondre, if I needed to sneak someone into my top 10, I would probably bump Tavondre out, put Quinn in just to have it in the top 10 as well. It's one of those weird things, Catch. There was productivity there at times. There was a stretch, obviously, where the QBR wasn't there. There was a 4-game stretch where it was a little bit of a struggle. So a little bit, I think the final game of the season was a little bit better. But for overall totality standpoint, I don't know. Quinn's not top 5 at this moment, right? But if you tell me, I feel like I can make an argument for at least a 9 or 10 spot for him based off of, again, I'll go look up some of his numbers, but I do feel like it wasn't all bad.
I mean, is that just where we are with the Texas roster, that we can talk about a player and one of the things that comes out of the mouth when talking about him is it wasn't all bad?
Oh, we said the same thing. Well, I mean, to a certain degree, you said it about Xavier. Now you gave more stats that kind of justify it as well.
Because Xavier's literally on the other side of the totem pole statistically from Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers, if you were to put him with his age group, I don't know that I can't say it's the worst because I don't have the data in front of me, but we know that statistically speaking, he's closer to the low end of starting quarterbacks in college football than he is to the high end. 132 for a season rating. He had his high points, which were really high. I mean, the Alabama quarter and the Oklahoma game show us his talent. And here's the thing, Anwar, if you want to tell me I want to put him into the top 10 because I believe his talent is so high, I totally understand where you're coming from. I really try to do this more because Texas has a lot of freshmen that I think would be in front of other guys for a most talented top 25. But I don't know that Malik Muhammad's better than some of the guys that he's more talented than right now. So I just tried to focus more on what these guys have actually done so far to a certain extent. But if you tell me that you want to move him into the top 10 because you think he has the upside of being a first-round draft pick in the NFL, which I bring up because one of the things I linked over to Orangebloods earlier today, and I know you saw it because you commented on the thread, was that a Pro Football Focus college writer did a 2023 mock draft that involved all players eligible. So freshmen, sophomores, juniors, guys that departed for the NFL, but the guys that were either forced to stay or volunteered to, everybody's involved. That guy had Quinn going 30th and didn't even have Bijan Robinson in the first round of this mock draft that he did. There's no question from a talent standpoint that Quinn Ewers is a top 10 guy. But if we're doing that, don't I also have to put Arch in the top 10?
Well, yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, honestly, if anything I had a qualm or whatever about was probably Arch at 25. If anything I would argue with you on.
You'd have him higher?
No, I wouldn't have him ranked over. I wouldn't have him ranked over Malik.
Why?
Because I'm not going to have a guy who's just stepped on campus for a few weeks ranked over at a guy who is legitimately supposed to be giving allegedly a shot.
You don't believe that though, do you?
I believe we'll see a little bit more Malik in the off season. Sure.
Let me handicap this. Malik's got a 10% chance of taking Quinn Ewers' job.
Sure, but I give him a better percentage of being the number 2 quarterback this season over Arch.
Right, but you don't believe Malik Murphy's the starting quarterback at Texas in 2024 under any circumstances, do you? I mean, and I'm rooting for Malik. So anybody that's watching this video, don't think I'm just asking the questions, the tough questions to Anwar. Don't mistake this for me being anti-Malik because I'm the exact opposite. I would celebrate him taking off.
There is a hope inside of the building, okay? So let me preface it before I give you my thought, okay? There's a hope inside of the building that Quinn has a fantastic year, leaves after this season, goes into the draft. Malik takes over in 2024, another fantastic year, goes into the draft, and then Arch takes over in 2025. I'm just telling you, if there was a let's lay out the plan, that's the plan and that's the hope. So knowing that's why I probably give.
Do you think Arch Manning and his family think that's the plan?
I think they're
You think
okay.
they told him in recruiting, our plan?
I know they ain't telling
Our
that.
plan is this. And then Arch was like, that sounds so fantastic. How about I give up the spring semester of my high school senior year?
This is recruiting, right? This is recruiting, right? You do.
But if we're talking about a ranking of the 10 most talented people in the football program, Arch has to be in the top 10. He just literally he's ranked in the top 10 for the same reason that Quinn Ewers at that point, because Quinn Ewers, his actual play does not justify being ranked that high. But the idea of what Quinn Ewers can become, I'll absolutely listen to. If someone just says, I'm taking his upside, and the upside alone is the reason why I think that Quinn Ewers belongs in the top 10, I totally understand it. At that point, you're probably ranking him right behind Banks in the program in terms of highest end raw ability. He can do things that other guys can't. I'm just saying that if that's where you're doing that as the focus or the reasoning behind moving Quinn up, then Arch has to be way up there as well, because there's nobody else on this roster that was the number one overall ranked prospect in their respective recruiting classes other than Arch.
I mean, that being said, I mean, yes, but there's, I think we could listen. Am I an Arch guy as well? Absolutely.
You're higher on Quinn. It sounds like you're higher on Quinn and whatever Quinn is going to become at his zenith than you are of Arch.
I want to go that far, but in this year, I have a belief that Quinn's going to rebound. I also expect Malik to take a lot of growth, and I think he's the number 2. And I think Arch is sitting there cooking at number 3. That's kind of where I'm at on it. I you know, and the dogs agree as well, you know, so.
That is disagreement, Anwar. That is what disagreement sounds like.
Music to their ears. They said, someone believes in Malik Murphy. You know, I know I'm not, I've had to recalibrate as relates to Quinn, but also understanding that there is, you know, so yes, if I'm going based off of what I believe from a talent standpoint, yeah, I think Quinn's up there from a talent standpoint. Quinn and Arch, no, I'm just saying right now. Well, I'm saying Quinn 1, Malik 2, Arch 3. That's where I'm at. So I would have put Malik. I probably would have put Quinn at 10, and I would have had Malik in my top 25. And I would have left Arch out.
Huh.
And I think Arch, and I think Malik, when you see him, when people see him in the spring, they're going to say, I want everybody to just take a note. And when you start seeing Malik in practice, and when you see him in the spring break game, come on back. And you're going to say, you know what, Onward, for those who, you know, the idiot who says I was clueless. I was about to say something I was about to say something bad. I almost went off. At the end of the day, watch what I say. I believe I'll be proven correct on this one.
My final thought will be, because I've got to go.
Oh, that's okay. My kid is starving.
I don't disagree with you necessarily about Malik being in the top 25, but if Malik's in the top 25, Arch has to be in the top 25. I mean, at that point, let's just put all 3 quarterbacks in the top 25 and say, because I won't find any disagreement that they're top 25 talents. Are either of those guys better as college players right now than Keelan Robinson?
You talk about Malik or Arch?
Malik or Arch?
Well, no, only because Keelan, from a special teams contribution standpoint, you can't ignore what he's able to do.
He's almost got a 7-yard per carry average per his career. Like he can't.
But I said special teams. I said special teams.
Oh, I know, but I'm talking about all of it combined. You have his
Well, you can't deny the block punts and things to that effect. Like he does affect the game.
I say that because I believe I had Keelan at 19. Let me check just to make sure. I did. I had him one spot above Quinn, actually.
Yeah,
so,
I don't think Quinn and Keelan are on the same plateau, say wavelength.
Well, so far you're right. One of them's been a good player and the other one hasn't. Overall.
Somebody led Texas to a 49-0 victory against OU. I don't know what the other guy did.
Scored in that game? I can't remember.
I don't know, but I do know one guy was balling out versus Alabama until he got hurt. Another guy did. Like there are some other positives as well.
Yeah, but you would say in the direct battle between those two guys, you would say that one guy has had the higher peaks. The same guy has the lowest valley, and then I think Keelan's just in between both of those things.
Keelan played in the bowl game. There was nothing, no disrespect to Keelan. There was nothing to write home about his performance.
It was misused. I mean, we start ranking Steve Sarkisian amongst his peers, and I'd point to something like that and say, "Yeah, exactly." I gotta. All right, we both got to go for different reasons. Yeah. Guys, do us a solid. Like this video. EL, real quick. You said, what about Ryan Watts? I had Ryan ranked at number 11. I really like Ryan Watts. For myself and Anwar and the guys over at rogueshop.com for sponsoring this video. Yes, like the video. Help us do that. We will see you guys tomorrow with the modcast. Until then, you guys have